Well, good afternoon. I am Gordon Murrison, co-founder of Open Planet Software. We're based down in Inverurie. Normally I get to say based up in Inverurie, but today I'm down in Inverurie. And we make apps for Mac, iPhone and iPad. We make our own apps, and we also develop apps for some clients. One of the clients we've been doing a lot of work for recently is a company called Feral Interactive, and they're one of the leading publishers of Mac games. They license big IP from the games companies and port them to the Mac. So we've been fortunate to be involved in a few of their more recent ports. We also have developed our own app, which is called Smoothie. And we first and recently we released the iPad version, and it's a stop-motion animation app, really great for kids, families, and used in education as well. And I want to talk today a little bit about what's involved in making apps like this. What do we have to do? Well, there's some technical stuff, there's some engineering that needs to be done to actually write some computer code. And the engineering phase, if you like, of the project is concentrating on building reliable code. You don't want your apps to crash as soon as somebody tries to run them. You want them to be maintainable, so that, you know, as your app's going to develop over the years and new things are added, you want to make sure it's easy to do that. And these are all software engineering practices that computer science people learn about at university. But engineering is the foundation of your app. It has to be well made, it has to be solid, but it's not enough. You can't just have something that's reliable. You need something that's going to be really great. And to do that, you need to consider some design. I like to think of design as kind of the 35,000-foot view of your app. It's all from 35,000 feet. You can clearly see how all the things fit together. You can see what it is, what it's for. You can think about who it's for and how it's going to be used. So, what is design? Well, design's not the bit you do at the end when you build something and then give it to a designer and ask them just to make it pretty. I think there's a misconception that that's what design is. But design is something that you do through the whole process of building an app. It's about considering the big things, like deciding which features you're going to include, how people are going to interact with your app, but it's also about thinking about the tiny little details, things that are going to add subtlety and refinement. Little things like the position of buttons and the layout of controls. And the goal of design, is to make a product it's so obvious when you use it that you think, why would it be done any other way? It just seems the natural way that product would have been designed or that app would have been designed. But getting to that stage of obviousness is really not easy. So the first tip I'd like to share is to try and keep your apps simple. This is true in kind of all software, but it's especially true in mobile due to the limited size of your iPhone screen or your iPad screen. And people are now expecting small apps that do maybe one thing and do it well. And if your app is complicated to use, they're just going to delete it. You know, people have no loyalty to a brand new app they've just downloaded. They're just going to delete it. And it's very tempting just to keep adding features. You think, oh, well, maybe this customer's asked for something, so I'll just add that feature in, and I'll add another feature in. But if you keep doing that, you're going to end up with a bit of a confused message. You could end up with something like this. And when you go to the doctor, you expect your doctor to be professional and calm. You don't expect him to sell balloons. You know, it just doesn't make sense. And I've got kids, and my wife works. And we need daycare to look after the kids, but I wouldn't be putting my kids to this place. And in the software world, if you just keep adding features, you're going to end up with something that looks like this. I think this is a Bible study app, and I presume that if you're studying the Bible, the most important thing is probably the text that's in the Bible, but it's buried in a tiny little box in the middle of this window. It's not very good to use. Compare that to an app like Instapaper. Everyone was talking about their favourite apps earlier. Instapaper is definitely one of my favourite apps. What it lets you do is, if you come across an article on the internet, you're never going to read it at that point in time. It lets you squirrel it away for later. strips off all the adverts and presents it in a really nice, readable way that you can read maybe when you're not online. And Instapaper, the user interface, three-quarters, maybe even more of that user interface is my content. It's the articles that I've bookmarked to read later. And down the left-hand side, there's, 6, 7 buttons, and that's the feature set. It's all about my content. It's not about the features of the app. So if you've nailed down your minimum feature set, you now need to make it obvious to use. And how do you make something obvious to use? Well, you set up an expectation of how it would be used and meet that expectation. So, for example, in our office, like in most offices, we've got doors, and it's 100% obvious how these doors work. No one's going to try and pull the one on the left. No one's going to try and push the one on the right. There's no labels to say push here and pull here. You just know, looking at that object, exactly how you're supposed to interact with it. And you need to do this as well. If you're going to develop an app, you need your app to be as easy to use as this. And obviously, we do a lot of Apple development, and Apple have certain conventions that are expected. And if you try and do something that doesn't meet that conventions, then you're going to be you're going to confuse people. Like the way when you're scrolling through documents, it bounces when you reach the top and the bottom. Red buttons generally mean you're going to delete something, and it's kind of a warning that it's a destructive action. And then there's a little square button with the arrow coming out of it, which is for sharing something. And these are just all conventions that have been built up. And if you start doing something that kind of goes against those conventions, things aren't going to be very obvious. So you see this button in a user interface, and this is from an app that plays movies. So you think, well, this is going to play the movie. But it doesn't. It gives you an option. So this has broken my expectation of what that play button was going to do. But it's worse than that. It's not just obvious. It's asked me a question that I don't know the answer to. I don't know what the difference is between playing it and playing the preview, and I certainly don't know what render movie does. That doesn't have anything to do with pressing a play button. So when you're considering the user interface, you don't want to be making your users making them have to stop and think and read. This is not being considerate to them, which is my kind of third tip. Be considerate to the user. What I mean by that is you've got to think, what does the user want to do with this app? So if we consider how an app starts up, this is your first chance to either do the right thing or do the wrong thing. You can impress them or you can annoy them. DVDs, especially kids' DVDs, are really bad. We've got one at home with the kids, and we put it in. The first thing it asks me to do is select the country. And United Kingdom is always at the end, so 6 pages in. So we go through that. Then we've got to sit and read through the legal and copyright information. Then it plays a really nice video that tells me not to steal DVDs and steal movies, which is a bit rich because I bought this from the shop, obviously. Then we get to watch the trailers, and if you're lucky, you can press the menu button and jump straight to the menu, but invariably not. Invariably, you've got to skip through each trailer. And then finally, you get to the main menu when you're going to be able to get to play your movie. But they have another little trick. Because the play button isn't there yet, you've got to sit through 20 seconds of this flashy animation, and this is driving you absolutely mad. But it gets even worse than this, because it happens each time you put the disc in. This is just not a good way to consider how people are going to use your product. So when your app starts up, should it show a splash screen showing your clever company logo and your branding? Well, probably not. They've just tapped the icon on their home screen. It's unlikely that you need to be reminded again about who you are. Or are they going to go and ask for you to go to the App Store and give it a 5-star review? Well, probably not, because if I've just launched the app to do something, you've disturbed me. I might go to the App Store and write a review, but it's very unlikely to be a 5-star one. The other thing that annoys me quite a lot is apps that advertise other apps. There's one in particular. It's a great app for kids. Again, it's called Mathboard. And they've got another one called Spellboard, and I've bought them both, and the kids love using them, but they keep advertising the other app. And we've bought them both. They're both sitting there on the home screen, but constantly it keeps saying, oh, you want to go and buy the other one? And I go, I've already bought the other one. So, And if you contrast this with something like iBooks on the iPad and on the iPhone as well, the way that iBook starts up, it's straight into your content. And it's even better than that because it's straight back at the page you were reading last. It doesn't show you the iBooks logo. It doesn't say, oh, there's an iBook store and there's some new releases this week. You might want to go and check them out. It just takes you straight back to where you were. And iBooks takes us even better, even further, because there's not even any technical computery type things on that screen. It just looks like a page. It's just books. And you don't even sit there and think, I'm going to use iBooks for an hour. You just sit down and think, I'm going to read a book for an hour. And this is, I know Apple used the word magical in all their adverts, and it gets a bit annoying, but this is kind of the magical thing about the iPad, that it can just become your app. There's nothing else there. And if you can design your app as well as iBooks, then you're probably on the road to success. But all this design stuff's great, but at some point we need to do some technical work and actually write some code. So again, this is quite Apple-centric, but to actually write some code, you're going to use a product that Apple supply called Xcode. And Xcode is Apple's integrated development environment. It's a free app that you can download from the Mac App Store. So there's kind of no cost to get started doing this. And what Xcode lets you do is everything to do with the process of building your app. It lets you manage all the assets that you're going to collate together to build your app, all the artwork, all the source code, and any other kind of, maybe you got video files or sound files that form part of your app. Xcode lets you manage all that. It's got a really good editor for when you actually write the code, the text editor. You can lay out the user interface of your app using something called Interface Builder, which is now built into Xcode. It lets you create things called unit tests, which allow you to test that small parts of your code are actually doing what you've written them to do. It also has tools for fine-tuning the performance of your app, because nobody likes an app that runs slow. It's also got all of Apple's technical documentation built into it, so you can refer to their sample code and their different APIs. And it can also help with the packaging and distribution. So when you finish your app, you can build it using Xcode, package it up, and send it off to Apple so that you can sell it on the App Store. Like I said, Xcode is a free download, and what that lets you do is write your code and run it inside a simulator that they provide. So you get an iPhone or an iPad simulator that runs on your Mac. If you actually want to install your product on an iPhone or an iPad to do some testing or development on there, you need to join Apple's developer program, which I think is £69, and that's per year. And that lets you install on up to 100 devices for testing, and it also lets you distribute it on the App Store as well. When you do give it to Apple, you have to go through a review process where Apple have some quite strict rules, mainly well-intentioned, maybe not all of them, but mainly they're well-intentioned about the quality of your software. Does it fit in with the kind of expected user interfaces? You're not doing anything particularly wrong. They will also pull apps that maybe infringe on other people's trademarks. So in general, they're trying to do the right thing, and they're also trying to keep it a safe environment, I think, as well for younger people. And then, as we've heard earlier as well, there's the Android store as well, which is not curated in this way. It's a little bit more like the Wild West. But there are other differences other than just the way these things are distributed. Excuse me. The programming languages that you use to write Android apps is Java. The one that you use for iPhone apps is called Objective-C. There's also different libraries that Apple and Google provide to help you develop these apps, and the tools are different. So in order, if we decide we are going to target both sets of users, we've got our idea for our app, and we've got our iOS users and our Android users. And in order to reach these, we're going to have to write two apps, one for iOS, one for Android. But is there another way? Could we write one app and use some sort of cross-platform development kit that might help us do that? Because that seems like it makes sense. You write it once, and it will run in different places. And it's going to take less time to develop one app than it will to develop two, or three or four if you're going to target BlackBerry and Microsoft as well. And these cross-platform kits do exist, but there are some quite serious limitations to using them. I have to say as well, this is for apps. It doesn't apply quite so much to games, because there are some excellent cross-platform development kits for games. But for doing sort of native apps that look like iPhone apps and look like Android apps, a cross-platform kit has some serious downsides. One of the problems is that you're always dealing with the lowest common denominator between the two platforms, which makes it, I think, impossible to develop a best-in-class app on either platform. I think the best you can hope for is an app that's maybe okay, and I don't think anybody wants to spend their time developing something that's maybe just okay. Cross-platform kits are not likely to take advantage of any of the latest features on any of the platforms, which is probably what's expected. When Apple release, iOS 6 or whatever next year, people are going to expect that your apps make use of some of those cool new features. And if you've used a cross-platform kit, you're going to have to wait until that cross-platform kit is updated to make use of those things. And if there's bugs in the cross-platform kit, you've got no control over that, and the vendor of that cross-platform kit may decide to discontinue it. So I started off talking about engineering as design as separate entities, but really they're all part of the same thing, and that's developing a compelling user experience for your users. I think the best apps, apps like GarageBand, iBooks, Flipboard, Tweetbot, all these apps are all very focused on the experience that they're giving to their users. They combine a very solid engineering foundation. They're very, very well written apps, but they have very simple, focused feature sets that have had kind of laser-like focus on their design throughout the whole process. So if you're feeling inspired to go and develop your own apps, hopefully some of what I've said will help you concentrate on what really, really matters, which is your users that are going to download and buy your app. So, thank you.